I'm Gilbert Cruz, editor of the New York Times Book Review, and this is the Book Review Podcast. It's mid-October, which means that we here at the Book Review are already looking back at 2023. We are deep into our weekly debates, in which we try to pick our top 10 books of the year, and we're also trying to narrow down all the books we've covered in 2023, and last year we reviewed something like 1,500, to a list of 100 notables. Yet even though we're looking backwards, we still have a couple months left, and on this week's episode, Jumana Khatib and I discuss some of the big titles yet to be released this year. Political books, celebrity memoirs, and a few works from award-winning novelists. Jumana, as always, thanks for being on.
Thanks for having me, Gilbert.
You usually come on to do sort of monthly previews. We're doing a little different today. We are looking at books that are coming out between now, which is mid-October, and the end of the year, some of which we have read and can't really pass judgment on officially yet, and some of which we just know are going to be potential talkers. So we've broken the list here into fiction, nonfiction, and celebrity memoir because there are several notable ones that are coming out in the next couple months. Where do you want to start?
Let's start with fiction.
Okay. I knew you were going to say that. I don't know how. Let's go down the list. The first one is The Vulnerables by Sigrid Nunez.
Yes. So honestly, I don't think that there's a better fiction writer on animals than Sigrid Nunez. She's so canny on them. If you read The Friend, which is her novel that won the National Book Award, you'll remember this very lovable Great Dane. She even wrote a very moving book about a marmoset that was adopted by Leonard Woolf. So I was delighted to see that there is a bird in this book. This is a COVID New York City book. It's called The Vulnerables. And it follows an unnamed narrator. She's a bit older. She's a writer. And I think more importantly, she's one of the vulnerables of the title, which I think if you remember, that was something we were so worried about, this vulnerable set during COVID. So this writer gets roped into a bird sitting job for a very wealthy friend of a friend. The bird's name is Eureka, has a very rich interior life. You can just tell. But of course, it's a springboard for thinking back to some other memories, thinking back to past loves, thinking back to her life because she's older and she's struggling to write and she's struggling to corral her thoughts in a way that she's accustomed to. But it's totally lovely. And believe it or not, there's a moment when there's an interloper because she's staying with the bird in an empty apartment as part of her bird sitting duty. And all of a sudden, there's a young man who becomes this interloper. And by the end of it, they actually have a very touching relationship. Vegan ice cream plays a role. I was very pleasantly surprised with every turn. And I'm not somebody who was even looking forward to the COVID novel. Like I knew this was a genre that we were going to have to contend with, and I could feel it rumbling toward us like heartburn or something. And so it's actually funny because one of the other books that I was hoping we could talk about was Day by Michael Cunningham.
It's been a while since Michael Cunningham has had a book out.
Yeah, it's been about a decade. And he came back with this one. And actually, one of our colleagues, Alexandra Alter, profiled him a couple weeks ago. And he told her, I just don't know how any contemporary fiction writer could not write about the pandemic. Mm-hmm. It's very different in tone from the Sigrid Nunez. This is kind of a classic Cunningham book in this sense. Of course, there's like a sly callback to Woolf. Michael Cunningham is the Pulitzer Prize winning author. He's best known for The Hours. He is somebody who, over his career, has really explored a real fascination with kind of unconventional families and unconventional love and arrangements. This is a family that's based in Brooklyn, and we follow them over 3 years, 2019, 2020, 2021. And a lot of the action happens off the page, right? So it's a very elliptical, but there's still so much time that passes in this book. This is a family headed up by Isabel and Dan. It's brownstone Brooklyn to start. They have young children, and they live with Isabel's brother, Robbie. In classic Cunningham fashion, this is a book with some unconventional relationships. He's really interested in the sort of tacit love between people that's maybe not immediately obvious. And over the course of the book, he spends time inside the perspective of the principal characters. And you learn so much about their backstories and how it's really brought to bear in the context of this crisis. And a lot of the terrible stuff, it doesn't happen on the page. You fill in the blanks yourself. I don't think you need to have been in New York to be able to understand it. But it actually, I found it very palliative in a way. Really, the thought of reading about COVID in fiction, I mean, it was like a cat in a bathtub. I was like bracing to hate it. And I found the experience of reading both of these books to be very healing in a way, or it felt like turning a chapter on it.
There have been several COVID novels already at this point. There was Gary Steingart's Our Country Friends. There was Elizabeth Strout's Lucy by the Sea. There have been several others. I've already heard people say, I don't know if I could read another COVID novel. But you have to think with something that really dominated our lives, shut the world down for more than a year, continues to have lasting impacts psychologically, physically, spiritually, that these are not going to go away anytime soon.
No, it becomes a lens for the writers to explore their predilections and their interests. And in that way, it's really fascinating to see what these writers want to do with this big communal tragedy.
I'm going to jump in to talk about a book here that comes out at the end of October. So this is a book by the newest winner of the Nobel Prize in Literature, Jon Fosse. He has written a book called A Shining. It's translated by Damien Searles. So for those of you who weren't paying attention last Thursday or a couple Thursdays ago, depending on when you're hearing this, the Norwegian novelist, poet, and playwright Jon Fosse won this year's Nobel Prize. He'd been on the list of potential winners for years, and he's not super well known here in America. He's well known in Europe, and he's very famous in Norway. But those who do know him here in America probably do so for his work Septology. Jumana, can you tell us what Septology is?
A tall order, but I'll do my best. So this is a sequence of novels that are all released. You can get it in one volume. It was written after Fosse converted back to Catholicism in his 60s. And this is really about a man toward the end of his life, looking back at his decisions, looking at other paths he may have taken. There's a really strong spiritual element to it, which is something that you see in a lot of his work.
You're bearing the lead, Jumana. You are bearing the lead.
I'm bearing the lead. What's the lead, Gilbert?
The lead is that these are 7 books that are written in one sentence.
Yes.
Over 7 novels.
Well, you know what? I'm not sure. As dedicated as our listeners are, that might be a little off-putting for some people, but
I think it's our responsibility to give listeners maximum information.
Fair enough. And for what it's worth, the Septology books were like the it book in certain regions of Brooklyn last year. The chances are good that if you run into somebody in Ridgewood, they might have an opinion about Septology.
I haven't been to Brooklyn in years. I did not have that insight. I missed it completely.
Yeah.
So that's Septology, but this book is Shining, which comes out at the end of October, as the novelist and professor Randy Boyagoda, who reviewed Septology for the book review, wrote about A Shining in his appraisal of the author. It's only 75 pages long, and it's made up of short, simple sentences. As Randy writes, it also somehow a luminous and subtle rewriting of the entire Divine Comedy. So I feel like we've really sold this guy. We've given readers multiple entry points. This is your latest Nobel Prize winner in literature, and he has a new book coming out. He cannot be denied.
No, we would never deny.
I'd like you to talk about one more novel that's coming out in the next couple of months. This one is called Absolution. It's by Alice McDermott.
So it's been a little bit since we've had a novel from Alice McDermott. You might know her for her short stories. You might know her for her novel, Charming Billy. This is very different from the other books we've talked about so far. This is set in 1960s Saigon. It's set among the expat community there of American expats, and specifically the wives of American men that are there working in the military or any number of things. And our narrator is this young woman named Tricia. She's so in love with her husband. She's a newlywed. She's in her early 20s. And she gets mixed up with another expat wife named Charlene, who's totally different from her. She's been there for longer. She's powerful. She has connections in the black market. She has this sort of dark energy. And Patricia is telling us this story after decades. So you get to see the tension of their motives and and the loneliness and the solitude and trying to build a friendship in this situation.
So those are not all the novels that are coming in the next few months. There's a new novel by Ed Park called Same Bed, Different Dreams. There's a new novel by Paul Auster called Baumgartner. There are several other ones. So their lack of inclusion on this list is not a nod to anything other than the fact that we only have a limited amount of time. But we'll be writing about them on nytimes.com/books. We'll be right back. Welcome back. This is the Book Review Podcast, and I'm Gilbert Cruz. I'm here with Jumana Khatib, an editor on the Book Review, who regularly joins the podcast when it is time to look at what books are coming out in the month ahead. Right now, we're talking about some notable books that are coming out between now and year's end. I'm going to have a brief detour into a few celebrity memoirs that are coming out quite soon. There is The Woman in Me by Britney Spears, which is a book that she titled after the Bob Dylan song that plays over the opening credits of The Big Lebowski. I think that's true, right? That's 100% true.
You are looking to me for help, and I'm the wrong person.
Yeah, I don't think that's true. It's called The Woman in Me, and it's been almost 2 years now since the saga of Britney Spears and the conservatorship that she had been under for almost 14 years ended. That itself was the culmination of this social media-driven Free Britney movement. We at the Times here had done a lot of work trying to report on who exactly was in charge of her life and career. That ended. She hasn't been in the public eye as much as she had been, although if you follow her on Instagram, I believe there was a video recently of her dancing with knives, which maybe is troubling, maybe it's not. Who am I to say? But she has a memoir coming out at the end of October, and I have to imagine that everyone who was ever interested in Britney Spears, anyone who has paid attention to the Free Britney movement, anyone who listens to 90s on 9 on Sirius XM like I do, will be buying this. Will be buying this book.
Listen, I have a lot of questions. And the great thing about this book, and I grew up with Britney Spears, is I have no expectations that any of my questions will be answered.
Yeah. So what are your expectations?
Oh, none. So this could be for an optimal reading experience.
It's a
I have
low
no
bar.
Expectations. Anything in there I think is going to be automatically enlightening in its own way.
Okay. The next one is huge. It's massive.
Literally huge.
It's behemoth.
Physically huge.
It's all of these things. This is a 992-page book. Now, I just read an 800-page biography of Madonna. We talked about that in last week's podcast, and I thought that was long. This is almost 1,000 pages. It's called My Name is Barbra, and it's by Babs. It's by Barbra Streisand. According to a recent profile that ran in Vanity Fair, written by former editorial director of the Book Review, Radhika Jones, who's now the editor of Vanity Fair, the book does not have an index. This is what Barbra Streisand can do.
The nerve, the gall.
You
But again, only for Babs, right?
Only for Babs.
Right.
I cannot imagine that listeners to the Book Review podcast, people that read the New York Times, will have any interest in Barbra Streisand. So I'm just going to move on very quickly from this one. But I just wanted you all to know that it's coming out. It's quite long. I imagine it's going to be a big gift purchase as we head into the holiday season.
Oh, yeah.
It's $40-something.
I have questions about the dog. Actually, that I have expectations.
The dogs that were cloned?
The clone dog and the mall. I have more questions than I can enumerate. Mm-hmm.
We should get you this book.
Yeah.
Great. Next one is Worthy by Jada Pinkett Smith. We all know who she is. In addition to being a famous actress, I remember her from several Matrix films, from the movie Set It Off, from the movie Collateral. She's part of one of the big Hollywood families. She's married to Will Smith, who for a time was one of the most famous actors in all of Hollywood. Their kids, Willow and Jaden, have in their own right become, in film, in music, famous people in their generation. And Jada was the host for 5 years of the online talk show Red Table Talk. I think a lot of people are going to want to read this because they know her from that. And there are some people who are going to want to see what further information she might have about how her family dealt with the aftermath of the slap.
Yeah, people are going to be really curious about this one.
Do I need to remind our listeners what the slap was?
We want to have like a sound gaffer to recreate how it sounded. The slap heard around the world.
A year and a half ago, during the Oscars, Will Smith got up on stage after Chris Rock made a crack at Jada and slapped him across the face in front of millions of people. And it was one of the more shocking things I've ever seen that was not on the nightly news.
We had weeks and weeks of takes.
A lot of discourse,
yeah.
Now we have a book, and the book is about more than that. I wouldn't be surprised if it's only a chapter in this book about her life, but it will be a notable one. So those are 3 celebrity memoirs coming out between now and the end of the year. I'm going to bring Jumana back to talk about more serious books. Let's turn to nonfiction now, Jumana. The first book on our list here is called Class. It is by Stephanie Land. What can you tell us about this one?
Stephanie Land is the best-selling writer of a previous memoir called Made. This was a real sensation in Netflix series. And it was a really unstinting look of just like how hard it is to be a single parent. She had an unplanned pregnancy. She was with a very abusive man. And so she worked as a cleaner for $9 an hour and was buried under bureaucracy and all this hard work. This book really resonated with a lot of people, whether or not it mirrored their own life. And so this new memoir, Class, is a follow-up. We find her, she's moved, she's enrolled in school, she's working towards becoming a writer, which is what she's always wanted. But we also feel just how precarious things still are. There's this one conversation. She's on the phone with the Y. She's trying to get her kid into summer camp at the last minute and get a scholarship. And you can feel just like how crushing that math is. But there's still a lot of love, and you can tell how determined she is. And so I think if you liked Made and you liked her writing and her perspective, this is going to satisfy those readers too.
Did you watch the Netflix series?
I didn't. I will devour anything about a single mom, especially if her kid is a daughter. Full disclosure.
What are you telling us here?
But no, I did not watch it. I'm too busy reading. I don't watch a lot of television.
That's the right answer.
Yeah.
Let's move to a very serious book. This one is called Some People Need Killing. It's by Patricia Evangelista.
So Evangelista is a Filipina journalist, and she has spent years documenting just the really shocking fallout of Rodrigo Duterte's war on drugs. So the book is set mostly between 2016 and 2022, but she pans out a little bit to let us see how Duterte came to power and how this all happened. His anti-drug campaign has just been staggering. It's thousands of people dead, communities totally torn apart. And interestingly enough, the book's title, Some People Need Killing, is actually a quote that Evangelista got from like a pro-Duterte vigilante. And she is so canny about language. Like she's so good about identifying just like the paradoxes and the irony that are inherent to this community as she's watching her country fall apart. It's very gripping and like literary nonfiction, even if it can be a little difficult to read.
This is a podcast that the New York Times produces, and so we are contractually obligated to end with 2 books about American politics. You're going to talk about one. I'm going to talk about one.
I'll go first.
Okay.
So this is a long-awaited biography of Mitt Romney. It's called Romney, A Life by McKay Coppins. Coppins is a political reporter. He was at BuzzFeed and now he's at The Atlantic. And he got some amazing access to Romney over years. I think dozens of interviews. Romney was very generous in terms of handing over his journals. And I think it also helps that the 2 of them share a faith. Coppins is also Mormon and has written about faith and politics. Around the time that Romney announced his intended retirement from the Senate, they ran an excerpt of the book, and it took a lot of people by surprise just how open it was and how kind of unflinching. It opens with how Romney has been stalked by this fear that he was going to die a very sudden and violent death. And this excerpt made its own weather for a little bit because people were saying, I honestly can't remember the last time I saw such an intimate and kind of vulnerable look at a politician, especially somebody who's so established and has had such a long, intelligent career as Romney. So this is something that people who love political biographies, people who love reading about politics, this is definitely something to watch for.
The next and final book that we're going to talk about shares a few things in common with Romney Life. It is also about American politics. It's also written by someone that is in the community that they are writing about. This book is called The Kingdom, the Power and the Glory, American Evangelicals in an Age of Extremism. It's by Tim Alberta. Tim Alberta is also a staff writer for The Atlantic. They have a lot of writers. He was previously at Politico and National Review, and listeners may recall him from earlier this year because he wrote just a savage and damning profile of CNN CEO and Chairman Chris Licht. It was the details in that profile that eventually led to the removal of Licht from the top of CNN. So he was in the air for a bunch this summer. His previous book as well was pretty well received. That was 2019's American Carnage, on the front lines of the Republican Civil War and the rise of President Trump. This one, The Kingdom, the Power, and the Glory, is quite personal. Alberta grew up the son of an evangelical. He is a practicing Christian. I've read a bit of it, and he really tries to reckon with how some corners of American evangelicism have elevated politics far above Scripture and the Bible. There are corners of that faith that almost see support for President Trump and before Trumpism, Republican politics in general, as being equal to the practice of their faith. It's something that Alberta and people that he knows sees as very troubling in the American evangelical faith. So he's a well-known writer. He's taken on something that is very present in American politics right now. It's fascinating to see the subtitle of his last book, which mentions the Republican Civil War just weeks after Republicans in the House went at each other and defenestrated one of their own. So I'm looking forward to this one. Jumana, before we go out, what's a book that you've been reading that you think our listeners should check out?
Okay, I'm going to throw you a curveball because I've actually been listening. This is my maiden voyage into an audiobook experience, and it's for Chain Gang All-Stars by Nana Kwame Adjei-Brenyah. It's incredible. National Book Award finalist for fiction. What's one way in which it is incredible? The casting is so remarkable. This is a book with a lot of characters. There's a lot of action in this book, and it's totally brought to life by the people that are reading it aloud in a way that I know the confines of my own imagination could not have produced something like this. It's incredible. How about you, Gilbert?
How about me?
Yeah. What are you reading?
It's October. Usually in October, I try to watch as many horror movies as possible. There a couple years ago, I think I watched like 18 horror movies over the course of a month. But now that I am on the book review, I don't have as much time to watch movies. And so I'm reading some scary books. I might be doing something coming up about ghost stories and ghost books. So one thing I'm reading now, I actually finished it this weekend, is Ghosts by Edith Wharton. And it's a collection published by New York Review of Books Press of ghost stories by the author of The Age of Innocence and Custom of the Country and Ethan Frome. There may be people who don't know that she wrote a lot of ghost stories, but she did, and some of them are great.
Terrifying.
Yeah.
Terrifying.
Are you going to read?
You know what? I'm such a scaredy cat, but I'm such an Edith Wharton lover. I think I could do it, but then every time I'm like, God, is there anything scarier than like a Gilded Age wasp? I don't know. I'll find out. Sold. Jumana, thank you so much for coming on the Book Review Podcast. Hey, thanks for having me. That was my conversation with Jumana Khatib about some of the more notable books coming out between now and year's end. I'm Gilbert Cruz, editor of the New York Times Book Review. Thanks for listening.